G'day, welcome or welcome back. It's been 3 days, and a lot can happen in 3 days. It's been 3 days of mask off moments, terrible questions, and polling that suggests that Pauline Hanson is on the up and up. We're going to get into all of that and more on the Mark Pirotta Show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Blaster! Welcome to the Mark Pirotta Show.
Before we get into the main stories for today, this poll came out, and it's pretty interesting to me. Now, this is a heavily right-leaning page. This page is effectively 90% filled with the most hard right-leaning people in the country that aren't like NSN members. But it's really interesting to me just how many people do not want any form of migration into Australia. Now, I'm not on that train in any way, shape, or form. I think that there are people who do need to come here in order to backfill some of the jobs that we simply cannot do in this country. It's not to say that there aren't people who can, it's just that if we want to enter these spaces, we need more than who are currently available. And so there does need to be some form of migration, and to stop it completely would more than likely cause a collapse that we have not seen in this country ever. We effectively managed to skate through most of the real hardships of the major economic collapses of the 1980s, 1990s, 1920s, mostly because we were and are still a growing nation. Now, the financial crisis of the early 2000s did hit the Australian economy quite hard, but that's mostly because our economy is based entirely around housing. But the idea that we would be able to full stop immigration is a little bit silly, especially when we aren't repopulating ourselves. Now, if we have this conversation in a year or a year and a half's time, and the Australian population puts their money where their mouth is, especially the right wing of politics, and starts increasing the number of children that they are having per person, then maybe this would be a different conversation. But as it stands, the idea of remigrating people, the idea of actually deporting people, which is what remigration means, it's just a PC term to make people not think that you're Donald Trump, is actually a silly one. It doesn't make any sense for the economy. It doesn't make any sense for the society that we've currently built. If anything, you should just stick to the word deport, because deport implies a criminal element, and there are people here who are here illegally. Something like 100,000 people are here currently, mostly on overstayed visas. But as a consequence of that, we have people in this country who are unnamed, unchecked, and simply illegal. And so deportations definitely make sense. We shouldn't be feeding these people in our prisons. They should be on the next plane out of Australia. Now, while we're speaking about planes, while we're speaking about people coming into this country, let's get into our first mask off moment. The first mask off moment was a severe refutal of everything that the Albanese government has been saying for the better part of a week. We've been speaking about the ISIS brides and the fact that they were able to get Australian passports. They were then stopped. And as a consequence, the Albanese government has now tried to make overtures to the fact that the federal government is not repatriating these people. However, Chris Minns came out and said, well, the federal government has actually been in contact with us about how and when we actually bring these people back home. Watch.
The reality is that New South Wales government agencies have been working with the Commonwealth since the end of last year about possible arrivals from Syria, from refugee camps. It's been on an official to officials level, and it has to do with what happens if or when they return to New South Wales. I think the number is about a third, but that may change. And I don't have a complete number on that because I'm just not sure about how many, if any, will eventually end up in New South Wales or in Australia. And I think most Australians would recognise that they didn't make this decision to put themselves in harm's way. A 4-year-old or a 3-year-old hasn't made a decision to sign up with Islamic State, and if they were to return to New South Wales, then I think we need to be transparent. The New South Wales government would educate them, and we would make sure that they were safe, and we would make sure that they were within an organisation or a group or an education or a school that had Australian values, because I think that's important, and I'm not trying to dodge that or suggest that that's not the case. If they were to return to Australia, that's what we would do. Well, look, I mean, obviously no New South Wales taxpayer will pay for airfares or a process that sees someone come to New South Wales, but if there is a child in our state who is an Australian, then I think most Australians would say, yeah, you do need to provide schooling for them. And hang on, I'm going to finish that. And I think the circumstances are important in this debate to be upfront about that. I worry about where these children will be in the years ahead, and I worry about what the consequences of doing nothing for them if they did return to Australia would be.
Now, unless we plan on doing a repeat of the stolen generation, I don't necessarily think that these children, however much Chris Minns wants to pretend as though it is only the children, will be coming back without their mums. This is not a silly comment to make. At the end of the day, the stolen generation was realistically an attempt to pull children out of poverty, out of crime, and destitute future possibilities, and bring them into a modicum of the modern Western world. It was the idea that you could educate these children in order to allow them to have the best possible future within the system that exists in Australia. That was the intention. This is effectively the exact same thing that Chris Minns is speaking about. The idea that you can take 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds from their mothers in Syria and then bring them into Australia and re-educate them away from their mothers. Their fathers more than likely are either in prison or dead, considering the fact that they are ISIS terrorists. And think that in doing so, you'll be, one, doing a noble thing, which more than likely in the next 5 to 10 years' time, you will be called racist for. You will be called some sort of white colonizer trying to bring in brown children from another country, in this case, and trying to re-educate them, wiping away their history. But that's not the mask-off moment. The mask-off moment is the fact that the Labor New South Wales government and the Labor Victorian governments have been in contact with the Albanese government, which is also a Labor government, in order to facilitate the possibility that these brides could be coming back. And no matter what Anthony Albanese tries to say, he cannot pretend as though planning for their return does not indicate that his government has a hand to play in, at the very least, allowing them to come. And that is a major issue. We've been speaking for a very long time now about what it is to be an Australian. The children of an ISIS terrorist and an ISIS bride coming to this country with birthright citizenship that is extended to anyone who has parents who are Australian, to me, is a major issue. Now, funnily enough, and probably hypocritically enough, that's how I got my Australian citizenship. My mother was born as an Australian, and I got my Australian citizenship as a consequence of that through birthright citizenship. But obviously, there is a difference between someone coming from Europe and someone coming from an ISIS internment camp. Unfortunately, making these sorts of little please-dos is kind of essential. I enjoy doing it just for the fun of it, but at the same time, if you want to get a message out, you need the people in your community to just comment, like, subscribe, all of the normal jargon, right? Please just take a moment and give me a hand. We need to create a culture of commentary together. And I love the messages coming in my DMs. Put it in the comments section so that everyone else can see it too. Thank you. And it is a hard line to draw. At the end of the day, it is not easy to say that a 4 and a 5-year-old should be coming back to this country considering where they're coming from. And also simultaneously say mum has to stay away. The idea of separating children from their families is not a good one. It's something that people have been speaking about in America, even though it's a lie for what they're saying in America, because there are no children who are deported over there. There are families who are deported and those who choose to leave their children and those who choose to take them with them. In this case, the Australian government would be repatriating, if they did this technically correctly, the children of ISIS brides who made their own willful decisions as adults, consenting adults, in order to go overseas and marry ISIS terrorists, to bring them here and give them an opportunity for a better future. But at the same time, we cannot pretend as though that does not run the risk of also allowing their mothers to come here, which is not something that can happen if we are going to have an orderly country that still believes in the rule of law. Let's move on to our next mask off moment. While we're speaking about bringing people into this country, we have Fatima Payman, who is currently telling Pauline Hanson that she ought to leave. She has come out and said that if Pauline Hanson does not want to be here, then, well, she can leave. Watch.
Tell Pauline Hanson that if she doesn't like how things are here in Australia, then she can really pack her bags and go to the US and continue being best buds with Trump.
Now, we've all heard the saying, go back to where you came from. But very rarely do you hear the saying, go back to where you didn't come from. Leave the place that you were born in. Emigrate out. Just be happy about the situation you're in or get out. It's very rare that you actually hear that, at least coming from, an immigrant to this country, telling someone who's in this country who's not happy about the fact that there are certain people in this country and telling her to leave. It's a very twisted and warped scenario. Now, of course, Fatima Payman can't be told that she's a racist for telling a white person to leave their own country. And to be fair, she is currently pregnant, and so you've got to give her some break as a consequence of that fact. But at the end of the day, for her to come out and pretend as though Pauline Hanson has to leave when, Fatima Payman had an opportunity to go and serve in the Senate in Afghanistan. Just before she effectively joined the Australian Parliament, her father asked her whether she'd rather go back to Afghanistan where she'd have more chance of being involved in the Afghani government. Now, if that isn't a contradiction, then I don't know what is. The fact that she thinks that our country is more racist than Afghanistan is sexist. But, let bygones be bygones. Our third and final mask-off moment is the worst of all of them. Peter Malinauskas came out in South Australia and he put his foot in it. He's pretending as though he didn't, but what he did, in essence, is ask this question. Who's going to pick the cotton? Now, that for a very long time was the left-wing slogan that was utilized in order to basically rage bait right-wingers on the idea of racism. But it's actually come to fruition. When you actually look at what Peter Malinauskas said, he effectively said this. Why are you mad about us bringing people from other countries, third world countries, into South Australia? Because if we don't do that, then who's going to do all of the rubbish jobs that we don't want to do while we're being nuclear submarine technicians, earning high wages? We need these immigrants to come to this country and to do the jobs that we don't want to do. Watch.
My message to One Nation voters is who's going to feed you and bathe you and wipe your bum when you're 90? Right? Because it ain't going to be your kids. Because if I get my way, they're going to be working on submarines. Huh? With high-paying jobs, so they can afford to own their home. That has to be built by someone. And who's going to do that work?
Now, this is a mask-off moment for two reasons. Number one is, if you're going to say, anything about immigration, wouldn't you say, where are you going to go and get your butter chicken on a Thursday night? Why is it that his first thought and the message that he wanted to give to all One Nation voters, who at this stage by polling is approximately 30% of the Australian population, he was here telling you, educating you in fact, on why he believes you ought to stop talking about immigration and immigrants coming to this country. And the best that he could come up with on his thesis as to why we need immigrants is that there aren't enough people to wipe your bum. When you are a 90-year-old white rich man and you need someone to wipe your bum, you need to have your little brown immigrant come so that they can effectively be your bum cleaner. That, to me, is one of the most racist statements ever. And it's something that the right wing of politics has been saying for a very long time. That those who speak about racism constantly and accuse others of being racists are themselves, in fact, the racists. And the second mask off moment is this. It is that Peter Malinauskas unwittingly revealed the truth about what immigration truly is. Because for the longest time, we've been told that we bring in skilled migrants to this country. Migrants who are coming in who can do the jobs that we cannot do. But it turns out that the only reason they are bringing in these immigrants is because they don't want themselves or their children to be the aged care nurses or the nurses in hospitals or the cooks in kitchens, because we're too good for that, apparently. We don't have anyone in our society who would benefit from having an easy access job that does not require any sort of degree in order to attain, something that is simply a vocation rather than it is a job. And what they unwittingly did in this is effectively say another thing that we have been saying for a very, very long time. Where are the skilled migrants? Because we're not seeing them. We're seeing a whole lot of people who, in fact, do not have a whole lot of skills that they can bring into Australia. And we're seeing them in places that would otherwise be filled by young people, young Australians, Australians who are looking for their first job, work experience, something to do on the weekend, trying to help out, trying to be a good citizen, having a vocation, something that is sorely lacking in this country, which is the idea that you ought to go and help your neighbour. Moreover, he also revealed that for some reason he hates his parents so much that he would never actually care for them. Now, as someone who has, in fact, had to look after his elderly grandfather, his elderly nunnu, I can tell you this, there is no greater love and no greater honor than you can give to your elders, and that is your grandparents and your parents, than to say thank you for raising me. I'm going to do the same for you. I'm going to care for you in the way that you cared for me. In your old age, when you return to a childlike state, I'm going to look after you in the way that you looked after me. I understand it's not everyone's cup of tea, but it is your duty to do that. It is your duty to honor your father and your mother. It is your duty to ensure that your grandparents and your parents never end up in a home unless they have a medical condition that stops them from being able to be looked after anywhere other than one of those homes. Because at the end of the day, it is your duty as a child in order to look after your parents in the same way that they looked after you. Now let's finish off with this last thing. We just mentioned the polling that has been coming out, specifically out of the federal elections mostly, but from the state as well. Victoria showing numbers where One Nation is in fact beating every other party for the first time in Australian history. But this latest poll is something that is very, very interesting. Because from an opinion-based level, the leadership of this country is clearly falling apart. Every single party has a negative trajectory when it comes to the opinion of their leader, except for one, and that is Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party. Pauline Hanson, in and of herself, is now the only leader who is gaining in the polls when it comes to their opinion base. Anthony Albanese and now Angus Taylor are failing astronomically. Miss Waters doesn't even exist in this polling, but more than a quarter of the Australian population do not even know who she is. And this polling is very indicative of the way that the country is going. The country is looking for a leader that they can trust. Now, Pauline Hanson is, despite all the things she says, which sometimes can be unhinged, sometimes can toe the line between proper and improper language, but at least she is transparent. The Labor government is now not only the party of least transparency, but also the party that will lie directly to your face and then call you crazy and a cooker for telling them otherwise. Where Jim Chalmers can pretend as though the economy's in good nick, where Anthony Albanese can pretend as though he's not repatriating ISIS brides, where men are women and women are men and there's no difference between the genders, where Chris Minns can come out and for $70 change your gender in Service New South Wales, including your license, etc. And all of this psychosis is leading to this fact. People have a natural attraction to the truth. Whether it is nice or whether it is not nice. At the end of the day, the best thing you can do is simply tell the truth. And Pauline Hanson is winning in that regard by leaps and bounds. There is no one that comes even close to her. She is, without a doubt, the only politician that you look at and you can say, I actually believe what you're telling me right now. I'm not going to have to look for the next 6 months to see whether what you're saying is true or false. At the very least, what she does is be transparent. Now, all of the other stuff you can go and find yourself. It's all on the website, all the policies, all the ideas, and everything that is happening with One Nation. But what I want to say to everyone and anyone who watches this simply before we wrap up is this. One Nation is ascendant, but they still have a lot of work to do. Do not throw your loyalty blindly behind a party. In fact, you ought to go out to the meetings. If you have an inclination to vote for One Nation, you should go make your voice heard. There may be things that they have not thought of yet. They've been around for 30 years. The base of the party is strong, but it is still fledgling as far as it goes to actually attaining power within the country. To be able to properly represent, they need to also be able to fund their campaigns and fund their mission. And so you ought to go and make your voice heard now, while things are still early on in the piece, where they are still growing, so that you, if you have something to offer, might be someone who can add to the conversation. Go be involved in politics. If you're a Labor member, go to a Labor meeting. If you're a Liberal member, go to a Liberal meeting. It is now incumbent on all of us who do complain and who do see where this country is headed to make ourselves available in the political process and say our piece, because otherwise, nothing's going to change. That'll do us for the show today. I will speak to you all tomorrow. My name is Mark Pirotta, and this is the Mark Pirotta Show. God bless.